He thought he was mocking a cleaning lady, but in the next few minutes, he discovered she was actually the boss who owned the entire company, and what happened next shocked the entire boardroom. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of Grant and Foster Enterprises, a Fortune 500 company buzzing with the usual Monday chaos. Employees hurried through the lobby, clutching laptops and coffee cups, their chatter filling the air with a sense of urgency. Among the rush, a woman stepped inside, tall, elegant, dressed in a simple but neat black dress with a scarf tied neatly around her hair. She carried no briefcase, no laptop, only a small handbag and the kind of quiet confidence that made her presence felt even without words. Her name was Angela Carter, though no one in that building yet knew she was the company's newly appointed CEO. She had chosen to arrive unannounced, wanting to see her employees not through the polished lens of introductions, but in their natural state, how they treated people they thought had no power. As Angela walked across the lobby, heads barely turned. Most assumed she was a visitor, maybe someone lost. But when she stepped into the executive floor, where polished shoes clicked against marble and egos filled the air thicker than perfume, a voice cut across the hallway. "Hey, you missed a spot by the elevator." The words came from Victor Harlan, the vice president of operations, a man known for his arrogance as much as his ambition. He stood with his suit pressed to perfection, a smirk curling on his lips as he gestured toward the shiny floor. "These tiles don't clean themselves, you know." His tone was casual, dismissive, dripping with superiority. For a moment, Angela simply blinked, realizing what he thought. To him, her simple attire, her scarf, her lack of a flashy badge could only mean one thing: she was the cleaning lady. Around them, a few employees chuckled nervously, glancing between Victor and Angela, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. Angela didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, her eyes calm but sharp, the kind of gaze that could slice through pretense. "Is that so?" she replied softly, her voice smooth but steady, carrying an authority Victor failed to notice. He chuckled, mistaking her poise for compliance. "Yes, that's so. I don't know how you people even get these jobs, but at least do them right. A company of this scale can't afford sloppiness, not from the top, not from the bottom. Understand?" He brushed past her, the cologne of arrogance lingering in the air, leaving behind whispers from the staff who had witnessed the exchange. Angela's fingers tightened slightly on her handbag, but she said nothing more. Instead, she continued walking down the hall, every step measured, her silence more powerful than any outburst could have been. She noted the faces around her, the receptionist who looked away, the manager who smirked, the intern who frowned as if ashamed of what he'd seen. Each reaction told her more about the company's culture than any report on her desk ever could. Victor, still unaware of his mistake, had already disappeared into the boardroom, preparing for the day's meeting where he believed he held all the influence. But he was about to learn a truth that would shake not just his ego, but the entire room. Angela Carter was no cleaning lady. She was the woman about to take the highest seat at the table. The boardroom of Grant and Foster was a world of its own, polished oak tables stretching across the room, leather chairs lined up like thrones, and a massive screen flickering with financial charts. The air buzzed with ambition and power, where every man in tailored suits and every woman in sharp blazers fought for influence with every word they spoke. Victor Harlan sat at the head of the table with the smugness of someone who believed he was untouchable. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the folder in front of him, speaking loudly enough to command attention even before the meeting officially began. "The new CEO should be here any minute," he announced with a smirk, "and let me tell you, whoever it is, they better know who really runs this place." Laughter rippled through the room, the kind that only comes from people eager to please the loudest voice. Angela stepped into that room quietly, unnoticed at first, her presence a calm contrast to the noise. She moved with a grace that commanded the space without demanding it, her eyes scanning the room, noting every smirk, every dismissive glance, every assumption written plainly across faces that didn't recognize her. Victor was the first to spot her. He pointed toward the door with a wave of his hand, his voice laced with mockery. "Finally, someone to fix that coffee stain on the carpet. Do it quickly, we've got important business here." A few chuckles broke out and no one corrected him. Angela stood there for a moment, her posture unshaken, her expression unreadable. She walked forward and instead of reaching for the carpet or leaving the room as expected, she pulled out the chair at the very head of the table, the chair Victor believed belonged to him until the new CEO arrived. Silence rippled through the boardroom, confusion flickering across faces. Victor leaned forward, his amusement fading into irritation. "Excuse me, that seat isn't for staff. That's reserved for." He stopped mid-sentence as Angela placed her handbag gently on the table, opened a folder and laid down her notes with deliberate calm. Then for the first time her voice rang across the room, steady, commanding, impossible to ignore. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Angela Carter, your new CEO." The silence that followed was deafening. Eyes widened, jaws tightened, and the very air seemed to shift. Victor's face drained of color, his smirk collapsing into disbelief as the weight of his mistake crashed down on him. No one dared to laugh now. Angela's gaze swept the room, locking eyes with each person in turn, holding them there until they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She didn't need to raise her voice or pound the table. Her authority came from the quiet, undeniable truth of who she was. In that moment, the hierarchy of the room flipped on its head, and everyone knew. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, and underestimated was the one who held their futures in her hands.
The room still hummed with shock, the kind that left even seasoned executives fumbling for composure, but Angela Carter didn't flinch. She allowed the silence to stretch, each second tightening around Victor like a noose, until he finally muttered, This must be some kind of mistake." His words trembled with the same arrogance he had wielded moments ago, but now they sounded hollow, fragile. Angela leaned back in her chair, folding her hands calmly on the table, her eyes never leaving his. "The only mistake," she said evenly, "is assuming a woman who looks like me could never sit in this seat." Gasps rippled through the room, some subtle, some sharp, but none louder than the sound of Victor's pride crumbling under the weight of her truth. She didn't need to humiliate him with volume, her control was in her composure, her power in her poise. Turning her gaze to the others, she continued, "I accepted this role not just to run numbers and strategies, but to reshape the culture of this company. And what I saw the moment I walked in confirms why change is overdue." The executives shifted uncomfortably, the polished confidence they carried into the meeting replaced with unease, their eyes darting between Angela and Victor as though waiting to see who would truly command this battlefield. Victor, desperate to claw back control, forced a laugh. "Look, we were just joking, no harm meant. Everyone knows the boardroom's full of banter." But his voice cracked on the last word, betraying his weakness. Angela's reply was a blade wrapped in velvet. "Disrespect disguised as humor is still disrespect. And in this company, it will no longer be tolerated." Her tone wasn't angry, it was resolute, measured, undeniable. She reached for a stack of reports she had brought, sliding them across the table. "Let's begin with the truth. Our numbers are dropping not because of market changes, but because of internal culture. Talented employees are walking out, innovation is stifled, and leadership has grown too comfortable mocking instead of mentoring." Her words struck with precision, each executive flipping through the reports with uneasy hands, realizing the weight of her preparation. Angela hadn't just walked into this room to prove she belonged, she came armed with facts that no one could ignore. As she spoke, the tide shifted, the executives who moments ago laughed at Victor's insult now leaned forward, captivated, even impressed by her clarity and strength. A few heads nodded slowly, betraying their agreement. Victor's jaw clenched, his authority slipping like sand through his fingers, and for the first time, his silence spoke louder than his arrogance ever had. Angela closed her opening with quiet fire, "This company is about to change. You can choose to be part of the growth or cling to the arrogance that holds us back. Either way, the future is already here, and it's sitting at this table." The weight of her words filled the room, and though no one dared to speak, every person knew, the power had shifted. The days following that boardroom confrontation were nothing short of a reckoning. Angela Carter didn't waste time basking in the shock she had delivered, instead, she set about dismantling the culture of arrogance that had taken root in the company for years. The first thing she did was walk the floors, no entourage, no rehearsed speeches, just her presence, calm but commanding. Employees, who had heard whispers of the new CEO's identity, froze at their desks when they saw her, unsure whether to stand or stay seated. Angela smiled gently, introducing herself not as Ms. Carter, but simply as Angela, asking questions about their roles, their struggles, their ideas. In those moments, the distance between the corner office and the cubicles began to shrink, and whispers of hope replaced the gossip of doubt. Meanwhile, the executives upstairs felt the ground shifting beneath them. Victor, humiliated yet still clinging to his pride, tried to rally. A quiet rebellion, dismissing Angela's leadership as inexperience wrapped in theatrics. He muttered to allies over coffee breaks, insisting she wouldn't last 6 months. But when Angela called the next executive meeting, she didn't just bring charts and speeches, she brought stories. She introduced testimonies from employees who had left the company, voices of talent driven away by dismissiveness and elitism. She read aloud one line that cut through the air like a blade, "I left not because of the work, but because of the way leadership made me feel invisible." The silence that followed was heavier than any statistic. For the first time, executives squirmed not under numbers, but under conscience. Angela's strategy was brilliant. She wasn't just leading with intellect, but with humanity. Victor tried to interrupt, sneering that sentiment doesn't drive profits, but Angela's response was swift and surgical. People drive profits, she said, her voice steady. When you dismiss people, you dismiss the very future of this company. That ends now. Slowly, she unveiled her plan: mentorship programs, open-door policies, diversity in leadership tracks, and accountability measures that made sure arrogance had no place to hide. Some executives resisted, their faces stiff, their voices tight, but others, those who had grown tired of Victor's reign of superiority, leaned into her vision, nodding, speaking up, offering support. The fracture in the old guard became visible, and Angela knew that was her opening. She didn't attack Victor directly, she simply made his methods look outdated, clumsy, and toxic in the light of her new direction. One by one, the voices in the room shifted away from him, until he sat alone in his defiance, his authority unraveling without a single shout. That night, as Angela left the building, employees she barely knew smiled at her, some even clapped quietly as she walked past. For the first time, the halls didn't echo with doubt, they pulsed with belief. And in that moment, Angela understood, she hadn't just taken control of a company, she had begun rewriting its soul. The day of the company's annual shareholders meeting arrived, and the air buzzed with tension. It was the first time Angela Carter would stand before investors as the official CEO, but more importantly, it was the day everyone expected Victor to make his last desperate move. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, her hijab perfectly framing her calm yet powerful face, Angela walked into the grand auditorium as whispers rippled through the crowd. On one side, investors leaned toward Victor, who had promised to expose Angela's inexperience. On the other, employees who had tasted her vision waited with quiet anticipation, praying their new leader would silence the doubt once and for all. The stage was set, and the lights dimmed as Angela stepped to the podium. Victor rose before her, arrogance dripping from his voice. He painted her as an outsider who stumbled into power, and mocked her background, reminding everyone of the day he mistook her for a cleaning lady. Laughter flickered uneasily through the crowd, but Angela didn't flinch. Instead, she waited, eyes steady, letting him dig his own grave. When he finally sat down, smug and sure of victory, Angela leaned forward into the microphone. Her voice was soft but carried like thunder. "Yes," she began, "he mistook me for someone invisible. And that is exactly the problem. For too long, this company, and this world, has chosen to see some people as invisible. But here I stand, not as your cleaning lady, not as a stranger, but as the leader you need to take this company into the future." She unveiled her results, charts showing profits rising after employee engagement programs, testimonials from clients praising the new culture, letters from workers whose loyalty had been reignited. Every word was a nail in the coffin of Victor's arrogance. Then she turned directly toward him, her eyes piercing. Leadership is not about titles or prestige. It's about service, vision, and respect. And if you cannot see that, then perhaps you never truly belonged in this company. The room erupted, not in whispers, but in thunderous applause. Shareholders stood, clapping until the walls shook. Employees cheered, tears in their eyes. Victor's face turned pale as he realized his empire of arrogance had crumbled in front of everyone. Security escorted him out quietly, his once loyal allies refusing to even meet his gaze. Angela didn't gloat, she didn't smile with triumph. She simply stood with dignity, letting the applause wash over her. For the first time in the company's history, people weren't just clapping for profits, they were clapping for justice, for change, for the leader who had turned humiliation into hope. And as she walked off the stage, she whispered to herself words no one else could hear: "They tried to define me. Instead, I redefined them." That night, the world didn't just hear about a new CEO. They heard about the woman who had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed, but who rose higher than anyone dared to imagine. And her story wasn't just the company's future, it was a legacy.
When Maya moved into the small town, she thought she was stepping into peace. But from day one, she was treated like a stranger. Whispers in the streets, cruel laughter in school, and silence from those who should have stood by her. They tried to break her spirit with every insult, every cold shoulder, every act of hate. But Maya refused to bend. She walked with her head high, her silence louder than their mockery, her dignity shining brighter than their prejudice. One day, when a crowd mocked her in the cafeteria, she stood tall and said, "Your hate can't define me. I am more than your fear." That moment changed everything. People saw not just a girl, but a storm, calm, powerful, unshakable. The same town that tried to erase her was now forced to remember her strength forever.
Amara walked into her own boardroom, dressed sharp, ready to lead. But before she could speak, her vice president, Richard, tossed her a set of keys and smirked, "Make sure the floors are cleaned before we start." The room chuckled, thinking it was harmless. Amara didn't argue, she just placed the keys back on the table with a calm smile. The next week, she called a meeting. On the screen, she showed photos of herself building the company from scratch, coding at midnight, pitching investors, carrying boxes. Then she looked straight at Richard and said, "I've done every role in this company, including cleaning floors. That's why I lead it today." The room fell silent. Richard turned red, and the board erupted in applause. The cleaning lady. She was the CEO, and she had just turned the tables.
Unlock stories that inspire and empower, only on Blax Stories. Subscribe now and witness every journey that changes the game.